Yeah, good morning. I'm going to give you my prediction on the game at the very end. So stick around. But man, I have got some amazing news if you're a Michigan fan, and some terrible news if you're a Washington fan. Let's talk about tonight's national championship game, the Michigan Wolverines and the Washington Huskies. Pac-12 versus Big Ten. Washington headed to the Big Ten next year, but this is the last year, of course, of the Pac-12. Washington beat Texas in an amazing first-round playoff game. Michigan beat Alabama in a game that was equally as great. I mean, look, we had two great playoff games, and we don't always get that in the playoffs. You have a lot of blowouts over the years in first-round playoff games. These were two great games. So, I'm not getting into the debate about the committee again and Florida State getting in or not getting in or whatever. Whatever people's minds are made up, whatever you think about that, you think, and nothing's going to change it. But no matter which side of that debate you fall on, those were two great playoff games. Now, that doesn't. The fact that we had great playoff games doesn't prove Florida State shouldn't have been in, and it doesn't prove Florida State shouldn't have been in. It's just a separate. It's just a separate fact that these were two great games. And Washington came out on top over Texas, although it looked like Washington tried to shoot themselves in the foot at the end. And, of course, Michigan beat Alabama with just a terrible play call and terrible execution by Bama on the last play of that game down there by the goal line. But anyway, let's talk about this one. Washington versus Michigan. This game's being played in Houston, Texas. So, I don't think you could find any more of a neutral site than what we have here in this one. It should be a great game. Michigan has not made they've made the playoffs. This is their third year in a row making the playoffs. This is their first trip to the national title game. Washington has not made the playoffs since way back in whatever it was, 2014 or 2015, actually, I think it was. And did they lose in the first round? I believe they did lose in the first round. So this is each team's first trip to the national title game in the playoff era. Neither one of these teams has won a national title since the 90s. Michigan won in 97. Washington won in, was it 91, I believe? Now, obviously, this was before the playoff era and before the BCS era, honestly. So, you have some split situations, and, Washington was awarded the title and by certain publications and other teams by others, and same with Michigan in 97. But in all reality, those, they were national champions in 91, I think, for Washington, 97 for Michigan. In any case, it's been a long time since either of these two teams have won a national title. That streak will come to an end for one of those two teams tonight. Washington versus Michigan. Jim Harbaugh, who's been around the coaching world for a long, long time, spent some time in the NFL, of course, before that, some time at Stanford, now at Michigan, his alma mater. So sort of a veteran in the coaching world, against Kalen DeBoer, who's been coaching for a while, but not at the Power 5 level. Only been at Washington for a couple of years and has put together, honestly, two really, really good seasons there. This one, of course, culminating in a trip to the national title game. I believe Washington now has college football's longest winning streak, too. What did they win? 18, 19 games in a row? Something like that. They were on a winning streak at the end of last season, and, of course, they have not lost. They have not lost this year. Michigan undefeated this year, too. So we're going to have a 15-0 national champion. Whoever wins is going to be 15-0. Something Alabama's never done in history, ever. Alabama's never gone 15-0. Unbelievable. What a shame that is. They don't have the ability. They don't have the ability to do it. But the winner of tonight's game will be 15-0 and the undisputed college football champion. I don't want to hear anything else about Florida State again, whether you think they should have got in or not. I'm not getting into all that, but you can't lose 63-3 and then pretend to claim a fake national title. And you can cry or type all you want about the players who sat out. That's your own fucking fault. Don't quit. Play the fucking game or don't show up. How about that? So anyway, I don't think anybody with any sense at all should even consider Florida State as a national champion. As was mentioned, in the 3 weeks we had between Selection Sunday and the playoffs, people are, if Florida State wins and this team loses and that team loses and you have a national champion with one loss and Florida State is 14-0, they should be national. Well, that didn't happen. You get 60 points. So anyway, but let's talk about this game, though. So Harbaugh versus Kalen DeBoer. So sort of the new kid on the block and Kalen DeBoer versus kind of the old hag. And I mean that in the most respectful way possible. Jim Harbaugh. Quarterback situations couldn't be any different either. You've got Michael Penix at Washington via Indiana. Of course, was at Indiana. Actually was committed to Tennessee coming out of high school. Was it Jeremy Pruitt, I believe, was not high on him at all. There was coaching changes. Penix withdrew his commitment from Tennessee, enrolled at Indiana, had some injury issues there, transferred to Washington, and has had two amazing seasons, including this one. J.J. McCarthy, on the other hand, been at Michigan for a while. This is, second, third trip to the playoffs, whatever it is. Split, they had another quarterback there, and they were sort of a Cade McNamara deal, but it's been the J.J. McCarthy show this year, and he's had a good year. Not great by any means. If you're looking at numbers, passing yards, touchdowns, whatever, there's nothing great really about J.J. McCarthy, but he's gotten the job done and he's won. He looked really, really good during the first month of the season. Now we can look at Michigan's schedule and, maybe figure out why that was. And then you look over the last 3 or 4 games, he's averaging like 140 yards passing a game, something like that. He's not a terrible quarterback. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. In fact, the last game they lost, what happened? He did make the mistake. He threw the 2 pick sixes against TCU the end of last season in the playoffs, and that was sort of the difference in the game there. He's protected the ball this year, and Michigan's got an amazing ground game with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, and one of, if not the best offensive lines in all of college football. He's absolutely dominated Alabama in that playoff game. And I think Michigan's probably got the best defense in college football. Iowa's good defense. Ohio State had a good defense. Penn State had a good defense. Georgia had a good defense. Bama, to a little bit of a lesser degree, had a pretty good defense this year. But for my money, I'd take Michigan as probably the best defense in all of college football. You look at Washington, it's sort of the opposite. Michael Penix is a game-changing, play-making player at the quarterback position. And I'm going to tell you this before I say anything else. If he plays like he played against Texas, it's hard to imagine Washington losing this game, isn't it? I guess this is a term that's mostly used in basketball. I don't watch a lot of basketball, but the term in the zone, when you see usually a shooter, and it just seems like everything he puts up is going in. That's what Penix looked like in that game against Texas. He was throwing, 40, 50, 60-yard bombs and dropping them in a bucket. 25, 30-yard passes over the middle on slants, posts, and crossing routes that were just laser beams. He seems to be able to make every single throw. The deep ball, the intermediate, he's got good touch when he needs to, and he can escape a little. Now, that's going to be tested here against Michigan because we talked about Michigan's offensive line. Their defensive line is just as good. Their defensive line is going to be a problem, I think, for Washington in this game. And if Washington's going to win, they're going to have to find a way to keep Penix on his feet and give him some time in the pocket. Because here's the thing. If you get pressure on Penix, not only do you possibly sack him, right, get him off his mark, disrupt the timing, it's hard to throw the deep ball. You can't throw the deep ball. If you don't have 3 or 4 seconds of protection to sit in the pocket or scramble out, whatever the case, then you can't throw the deep ball. So if Michigan is able to pressure Penix, that could relieve some of the pressure on Michigan's back end with having to cover these receivers. And they got an amazing group of wide receivers led by Dunze, a probable first-round pick in the NFL draft. But they've got 2 or 3 really, really good wide receivers that I think are probably going to play in the NFL. Now, there's nothing, to me, anyway, overly impressive about Washington's ground game offensively. But they get the job done when they need to. It's kind of the opposite of sort of traditional thinking when it comes to football. You run the ball to set up the pass. They kind of lull you to sleep with the passing game, and then they can hit you on the ground on occasion when they need to. Obviously, they had that game against Southern Cal where they ran for like 400 yards, but, I mean, literally anybody could run the ball for 400 yards on Southern Cal. I do think Michigan, just watching these two teams play over the course of the season, Michigan has looked like a better team than Washington to me most of the time. Washington had that lull really in the second half of the season after they beat Oregon the first time where it's hard to really know what was going on. There are some stories that Penix might have been hurt or nursing an injury during that last 4 or 5 weeks of the regular season, but something just looked off and you weren't sure if they were just sleepwalking. Remember, they had all those close wins. They've won something like 9. Let's see how many. They got 14 wins this year. Aren't like 11 of them one score or less? They're sort of they remind me of TCU from last year in that way. Now, this is not the same team as TCU. I talked about this leading up to the Washington-Texas game. They're not the same team at all as TCU. but they remind me of TCU in that they just keep winning close game after close game after close game. And you find yourself sitting on the edge of your seat watching these Washington games going, eventually this is going to catch up to them. Eventually this is going to catch up to, and it just never does. In TCU's case, it did in the Big 12 championship game where they lost to, was it Oklahoma State? Or no, Kansas State, sorry. And then, of course, they just got skull-drugged by Georgia in the national title game after beating Michigan in the first round. But Washington, they just keep winning. And again against Texas, another one-score game where Texas has the ball at the end with a chance to go down and win, and Washington just hangs on and finds a way to win. So I do think Michigan has looked like the better team most of the year. Now, you can say, well, their last 2 or 3 games, offensively, they didn't look very good, and that's true, but those were also their toughest opponents of the year. They played, I believe, if I remember right, Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State in their last 3 games. Penn State and Ohio State, obviously top 15 teams. Maryland, a decent team. I don't think they finished ranked, but they're, a decent team. And then they had the game against Alabama where, again, the offense didn't light the world on fire. It's not sort of a up and down the field shock and awe kind of deal from their offense, but that ground game just gets the job done. And J.J. McCarthy, again, while not sort of, not the game-changing playmaker maybe that Michael Penix can be, he just gets the job done. He just takes Michigan right down the field time after time after time, and they do enough behind that running game and a really, really good defense to get the job done. Michigan does. And it's hard to find a real weakness on this Michigan team. It's not the defensive line or the offensive line. It's not the running backs. To me, they kind of remind me of Georgia in that they've got decent wide receivers. They've got wide receivers that can run. They've got wide receivers that can catch. They've got the wide receivers that can run the routes. They've got that. But none of them are, your top-end wide receivers. And that's not a knock on Michigan. And obviously, if I'm comparing them to Georgia, it's not something you need to win a national title. Georgia won 2 national titles with a bunch of wide receivers the majority of people watching this video can't name. So I wouldn't necessarily consider that a weakness for Michigan, but look, they don't have an Adunze, right? But they don't need one. They've got Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, an NFL offensive line. And again, J.J. McCarthy has made enough plays over the course of this season to keep Michigan undefeated. Here's what it comes down to for me when I look at this game. If both teams play their best game, who would win? Now, this rarely happens, okay? This rarely happens. Usually, one team stumbles in one area or another, whether your defense lets you down, your offense lets you down, your special teams let you down, whatever the case might be. If both teams play their best game, what do I think would happen? I think if both teams played their best game, I think Washington would probably win. I would probably take Penix in that situation to make one more play than what anybody on Michigan could make. I think Penix is probably the best player in this game, although, like I've mentioned 2 or 3 times already, I think Michigan has been the best team in college football over the course of the season so far. I fell for it when it came to Washington, right? I picked them to lose to Oregon during the regular season. I picked them to lose to Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. I picked them to lose to Texas in the first-round playoff game, and they just keep winning. With Michigan, I picked them to win the Big Ten back in the preseason. I picked them to make the college football playoffs back in the preseason. I picked them to beat Ohio State back in the preseason. I think I had Michigan at 11-1 was my preseason prediction, but the loss was not to Ohio State, and I had them winning the Big Ten and making the playoffs. So obviously, I was wrong with the one loss. They were 12-0, but I've picked Michigan in every game this year, week by week, with the exception of the playoff game. I picked Alabama, so I was 0-2 picking games in the playoffs. I picked Texas to beat Washington. Washington beat Texas in a 1-score game. I picked Alabama to beat Michigan. Michigan beat Bama in overtime. Now, those games were close. In the case of the Michigan-Alabama game, it went to overtime. So, yeah, I got the games wrong, but, if we watched those teams play each other 10 times, it'd probably be 50-50 on who wins and loses those games. So, I don't feel bad about picking those games wrong. But the reality is, I did pick those games wrong. So, getting back to the beginning of the video, I've got some great news for Michigan fans and some heartbreaking news for Washington fans. Uncle Lou has decided to go with Washington. I think Michael Penix is just going to make one more play than what Michigan is able to make offensively. Now, I could be dead wrong here, obviously. Bowl season has been a train wreck for me, predicting games. I don't track my wins and losses, but I have got, since bowl season started, up to and including the playoffs, I've picked way more games wrong than I've picked right. It's not even really that close, including both playoff games. So I'm going with Washington to win a close one, another one-score game. And I think Washington gets it done. So that's obviously great news for Michigan because I can't pick a game right to save my life, and it's terrible news for Washington. So I'm picking Washington to win the national title. So congratulations to Michigan for winning it all. Have a great day.